Hi YouTube! So a few weeks ago I was giving a lesson to one of my students and he was trying to learn the ending breakdown to New Millennium Cyanide Christ by Meshuggah. He was able to play the bass drum pattern, but he was having trouble putting the snare on the backbeat on count 3. I then remembered this cool little trick for putting the backbeat against Djent style polyrhythms that are going on with the feet and just different syncopated grooves. Now what I mean by this is when bands like Meshuggah or Periphery or Animals as Leaders have some kind of really syncopated pattern going on with the feet and the guitars, and then the snare is playing a halftime kind of feel on top of that. Now I know some of you might be able to naturally play like whatever kind of jacked up patterns with the feet and then play a halftime groove on top of that, but for someone like myself it's a little bit harder for me to feel, so I usually end up having to write it out or really slow it down, and it's this really time-consuming process. However, this technique I'm going to show you right now I've found really helps to kind of cut down the process, and then you can usually end up figuring a pattern out within like 10 minutes instead of a half hour to an hour. Now just a disclaimer, I didn't come up with this technique. It was shown to me by this guy Mike Rawlick, who I got a few lessons with a couple years back. But I just think it's really cool, and I think I've never really seen anybody else do it, and I think it's a really smart, kind of like work smarter, not harder sort of technique. And I think it's something that the drumming world is going to really appreciate. So enough talking, let's move on to step 1. So the first step is to figure out whatever rhythm you're trying to play with the feet against the quarter note with the right hand. So now I'm going to use the ending groove from New Millennium Cyanide Christ to kind of give you an idea of how this goes. I wanted to use the breakdown at the end of New Millennium Cyanide Christ because A, it's one of the sickest breakdowns ever, B, it's a quintessential Thomas Hack groove, and once you kind of start to figure that out, then it's easier to kind of see how all the Meshuggah songs work. So let's check out the groove with just the right hand and the kicks at 80 beats per minute. So now step 2 is where things really get cool. Once you figured out how to play the quarter note with the right hand, now what we're going to do is use the cymbals as a map to kind of give you an idea of where each of the beats are in the measure. Now what I mean by this is I'm going to play the right hand on count 1 on the hi-hat, count 2 on the splash, count 3 on the stack, and count 4 on the ride, and that's going to repeat. So what I find is that when people are trying to do these syncopated polyrhythms and stuff with the feet, is that they end up kind of following the feet with the snare, where the snare actually ends up getting displaced more often than not to different parts against the feet. But the main idea is just to give you an idea of where each beat of the bar is, so you can keep track of where the snare is supposed to go against the syncopated foot patterns. It might be a little bit easier to understand if I demonstrate it instead of explain it. So let's check it out on the kit at 80 beats per minute. So now let's move on to step 3. Now that you know how the kick pattern goes against a quarter note with the right hand, and then you've moved it to each of the different cymbals to give you an idea of where each beat in the bar is, now we're going to add the snare on beat 3. Now the cool thing about this is using the cymbals to keep track of where each beat is, it's really easy to know exactly where you're supposed to put the snare. So for instance, I'm going hi-hat, splash, stack. ride. Hi-hat, splash, stack, ride. I know that the stack is on beat 3. I'm going to play the snare on beat 3 every time. So you're going to go I know if I play the snare with the ride, it's on the wrong beat. Or if I play the snare with the splash, it's on the wrong beat. So this really helps to kind of shortcut your way around figuring out where the snare is supposed to go during these grooves. So let's go back to the kit and see what this sounds like at 80 beats per minute. So let's see the groove with the right hand on one surface at 80 beats per minute. Cool, so that's it. Now keep in mind this doesn't just have to apply to Djent style, Meshuggah grooves and stuff like that. You could use it for a single bass pattern or any other kind of thing like that. So I hope you found this useful and you learned something. I also hope it saves you some time next time you're trying to put a backbeat or a halftime groove against a polyrhythm. Feel free to share, like, or subscribe for more drum related content. Thanks YouTube. Later.